The dim glow of the chandelier above flickered slightly, casting shadows over the sleek, polished surface of the dining table. The room was silent, except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I sat there, staring at the thick stack of legal papers in front of me. My hands trembled slightly as I traced the words at the top of the document: prenuptial agreement. Across from me, Jacob, my fiancé of 3 years, leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He tapped his fingers against the wooden surface, his well-groomed hands betraying none of the tension in the air. "It's just a formality, Harper," he said smoothly, his voice coated with feigned reassurance. "You know how these things are. Just a precaution." A precaution. My fingers tightened around the pen he had slid across the table. My mind raced, trying to process the implications of what was happening. We had been together for 7 years, had struggled through college, first jobs, moving in together, and now, on the verge of our wedding, he was suddenly drawing lines between us? I forced a small smile. "Of course, Jacob. Just a backup plan, right?" His lips curled into an easy grin. "Exactly. You're smart, Harper. I knew you'd understand." But I didn't understand. I didn't understand why a man who claimed to love me, who had spent years building a future with me, suddenly felt the need to protect himself from me. Unless he was planning for a future without me. I lowered my gaze to the contract, skimming over the sections quickly. It was clear. If we ever divorced, I would walk away with nothing except my personal belongings. No share of our joint assets. No access to his accounts. Nothing. I bit the inside of my cheek, feeling my stomach churn. But I couldn't let him see my emotions. Not yet. I took a deep breath and signed my name at the bottom. The ink was still drying when Jacob reached over, placing his hand over mine. "See? No big deal," he murmured, pressing a kiss against my knuckles. "You're my future, Harper. This is just a safety net, that's all." I smiled at him, but inside I was already planning my own safety net. Because Jacob had no idea what I already knew. The secret account. 2 weeks ago, I had been using Jacob's laptop to check my emails when a notification popped up in the corner of the screen. A bank statement from an account I didn't recognize. At first I hesitated. I wasn't the kind of person who snooped. But something about the alert made my stomach twist. I clicked on the notification, and that's when I saw it. An account in Jacob's name, completely separate from our shared finances, containing over $200,000. My heart stopped. This wasn't our joint savings. This wasn't from his salary. This was hidden money, money I had never known existed. I scrolled through the transactions, my hands shaking. The deposits weren't regular paychecks. They were lump sums, wired from different sources, most of them labeled private transfer. Where was this money coming from? And more importantly, why was he hiding it from me? A silent betrayal. For days I kept my discovery to myself. I observed him, how he acted, how he spent money. Nothing seemed different. He still kissed me goodnight, still made me coffee in the mornings, still told me he loved me. But now I didn't believe him. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I casually asked, "Hey, how's our savings looking? Should we set aside more for the honeymoon?" Jacob barely looked up from his phone. "Nah, we're fine. You know I never check that stuff. You're the numbers genius." Liar. He looked me straight in the eyes and lied. That's when I realized Jacob wasn't just protecting himself. He was preparing for something. And tonight, with the prenup in front of me, he had confirmed my worst fears. He was getting ready to leave me. The calm before the storm. That night, as Jacob slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I had been so blind. I had trusted him with everything. My heart, my future, my life. And now I was realizing that I was just an option for him. But I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. Because Jacob thought he was one step ahead of me, he was wrong. A plan is born. The next morning, I drove into the city, gripping my coffee like a lifeline. On the passenger seat sat a folder containing copies of the prenup, the secret bank statements, and screenshots of every suspicious transfer I had found. I didn't know what I wanted yet. Revenge, freedom, answers. But I knew one thing for certain. Jacob wasn't the only one with a backup plan now. I sat outside Carver & Associates, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel as I took a deep breath. The manila folder on the passenger seat felt heavier than it should have, filled with copies of the prenup, the bank statements, and every suspicious transaction I had uncovered. I hadn't even walked into the office yet, and my heart was already racing. What if I was overreacting? No. The facts were there. Jacob had been hiding money, planning his escape, and now he had made sure I would walk away with nothing. I needed answers. Grabbing the folder, I stepped out of the car and walked inside. The truth about the prenup. The receptionist led me through a sleek office, the scent of leather and fresh coffee filling the air. A few minutes later, I was sitting across from Mr. Carver, a sharp-eyed lawyer in his late 50s. He skimmed through the prenuptial agreement, flipping the pages quickly before exhaling. "Miss Harper," he said, tapping the document with his pen. "Tell me, are you sure you're the only one without a backup plan?" My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" He smirked. "Your fiancé made a crucial mistake. He thought he was being smart, but this contract, it's sloppy." I frowned. Sloppy how? Carver flipped to a particular clause, tapping it. If Jacob was truly covering his assets, he should have disclosed all of his financial holdings here. He pointed to a section that listed only his primary checking account and our joint savings. But he didn't. I inhaled sharply. He didn't include the hidden account. Carver leaned back, crossing his fingers. "Which means it's not protected by this prenup." My hands clenched in my lap. "So, what does that mean?" "It means, legally, you have a claim to that money." A slow, cold realization spread through me. Jacob had been so confident, so sure that he had outsmarted me, but he had been careless. "Now," Carver continued, his gaze calculating, "the question is, what do you want to do about it?" The first move. I left the office with a plan. Jacob thought I was clueless, that I would sign the prenup, marry him, and eventually, he would leave me with nothing while keeping his secret fortune. But now, I wasn't going to let that happen. That night, I made dinner like nothing had changed. A warm, home-cooked meal, his favorite steak with garlic butter, mashed potatoes on the side. I kissed him when he walked in, smiled at his jokes, and let him believe that I was still playing my role. But inside, I was watching, calculating. Because if Jacob was hiding one thing, he was likely hiding more. And I was going to find everything, following the trail. The next morning, I waited until Jacob left for work. Then I opened his laptop. I wasn't reckless. I had memorized the banking details from the account notification I had seen before, but now I wanted more. I searched through his emails, his transaction history, anything that could tell me where this money was going. And then I found her. The other woman. The email was buried deep in his inbox under an alias he must have thought I wouldn't check. Rebecca. I clicked on the thread, my stomach twisting as I read the messages. "Rebecca, I can't stop thinking about last weekend. I know we said we'd take it slow, but it's getting harder to wait." "Jacob, me too. Gorgeous. Just be patient. Things are almost in place." I closed my eyes, swallowing the bile rising in my throat, almost in place. He wasn't just saving money to leave me, he was preparing to replace me. I forced myself to keep reading. Hotel bookings, dinner reservations, payments to a jewelry store, and the biggest betrayal, a lease agreement for a condo. Signed by Jacob and Rebecca. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. He had planned everything. The wedding, the honeymoon, the fake future with me, all of it was a stall. Because the moment things were in place, he was going to leave me. A game of pretend. That night, as Jacob lay asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling. I had given this man 7 years. My trust, my love, my everything. And in return, he had built an escape route. But I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. No, if Jacob thought he was going to walk away untouched, he had another thing coming. Because now, I wasn't just going to make sure he needed that secret account. I was going to make sure it was all he had left. Setting the trap. For the next week, I did something I never thought I would do. I pretended. I played my role flawlessly. The devoted fiancé, excited for the wedding. I kissed him goodbye in the mornings. I laughed at his jokes. I let him believe that I was still in the dark. But the moment he left for work, I went into action. Phase 1. The investigation. I visited a forensic accountant, someone Mr. Carver had recommended. I handed over every document I had, the bank statements, the hidden account details, the payments to Rebecca. "Can you track where this money is coming from?" I asked. The accountant nodded. "Absolutely. If he's been moving assets around, we'll find it." Jacob thought he was covering his tracks. He wasn't. Phase 2. The condo. The next day, I drove to Rebecca's new condo. I wasn't reckless. I didn't go inside or knock on the door. I waited. And sure enough, she arrived. She was exactly what I expected. Pretty, young, naive. The type of woman who believed in stolen glances and whispered lies. The type of woman who thought that a man cheating on his fiancée would never do the same to her. I watched as she disappeared inside, oblivious, and I smiled, because if she thought she had won, she hadn't seen anything yet. The final step that night, after dinner, I poured Jacob a glass of wine, his favorite. I let him relax, unwind. Then, casually, I said, I was thinking maybe we should move some of our savings into a joint account. You know, to prepare for the wedding. His grip on his glass tightened, just for a second. A flicker of hesitation in his eyes. Then he smiled smoothly. That's sweet, babe. But let's keep things the way they are, just in case. There it was again, just in case. I tilted my head. In case of what? His smile didn't falter. Oh, you know, life happens. I fought the urge to laugh in his face, because he thought he was feeding me a lie. But in reality, he had just confirmed everything. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Proceed with everything. Jacob had made his move. Now it was my turn. Jacob had no idea what was coming. For the past week, I had played my role flawlessly, the devoted fiancé, excited for our upcoming wedding. But the moment he left for work, I was working on something else. I had already uncovered his hidden savings account, his plans to leave me, and his affair with Rebecca. But I wanted more. I needed to ensure that when he walked away, it wasn't with his secret fortune, his job, or his dignity. It was time for the next phase of my plan. Step 1. Freezing the assets. Jacob had been careful, but not careful enough. His mistake? He had left too many digital breadcrumbs. With my lawyer's help, I sent an official legal inquiry to our bank, requesting documentation of all financial activity linked to Jacob's personal accounts. Within 24 hours, we had confirmation. Jacob had been moving large sums of money from our joint savings into his hidden account, funneling money toward his new life with Rebecca. That was all I needed. At 11:30 a.m., I walked into our bank, dressed in a crisp white blouse and heels, exuding confidence. The teller greeted me warmly. She recognized me. I was the one who handled our finances, after all. How can I help you today, Miss Harper? I slid a legal document across the counter, smiling politely. I need to make some changes to our accounts. She scanned the paper, and her eyes widened slightly. The moment she saw the official signatures and legal approval, she understood exactly what was happening. Divorce. Asset separation. Without hesitation, she nodded. Of course. What would you like to do? First, I said smoothly, I'd like to freeze all joint accounts, effective immediately. A pause. Then, a clicking of keys as she processed my request. Within minutes, Jacob's access to our joint finances was gone. And while we're at it, I continued, please remove Jacob Reynolds as an authorized user on my credit cards. Another click. Another confirmation. Within 5 minutes, I had successfully cut him off from every resource he thought he could use to escape. I smiled, tucking the documents into my purse. Thank you. Have a great day. Then I walked out of the bank, knowing that Jacob was about to face his first major setback. Step 2. Exposing his fraud. By the time Jacob checked his bank app at lunch, he would see one thing: access denied. I imagined his panic, the way his heart would pound as he frantically refreshed the page. But that was only the beginning, because now I was going after his career. I had already discovered that Jacob had been funneling company funds into his hidden savings account, disguising the transactions as business expenses. But the moment I sent those documents to his employer, that wouldn't just be financial misconduct. That would be corporate fraud. And if his company was smart, they wouldn't just fire him. They would press charges. At 2:45 p.m., my lawyer called me. Lori, it's done. We submitted everything to his company's HR and the board of directors. I exhaled slowly. How bad is it? Bad enough. With the evidence we provided, they have no choice but to investigate. If it all checks out, he won't just lose his job. He'll be looking at legal action. I closed my eyes, a slow smirk forming on my lips. Good. Step 3. The condo surprise. By the time Jacob left work, his day had already fallen apart. His bank accounts were frozen. His employer had launched a fraud investigation. His company card was deactivated. But there was one more thing I had planned for him. Rebecca. Jacob had used his secret savings to pay for a luxury condo lease, one that Rebecca believed he could afford. But once his accounts were locked, his payments would stop. And when that happened, Rebecca would realize that her perfect man was completely broke. I checked my watch. 5:30 p.m. Right about now, Rebecca would be checking her email and seeing a notification from the leasing office. Final notice, payment overdue. Your lease may be terminated. I wished I could see her face, because the moment she called Jacob, his entire web of lies would collapse. The moment of truth. That evening, I sat on the couch, sipping a glass of wine, waiting for Jacob to come home. When I heard the front door unlock, I calmly set my drink down. Jacob stepped inside, his face pale, his eyes wide with barely concealed panic. I could practically hear his heartbeat pounding in his chest. "Hey babe," I said sweetly. "How was work?" His fingers twitched. He was trying to compose himself, but I saw the way his jaw clenched, the way his hands shook slightly. "Lori," he said slowly, his voice tight. "What did you do?" I tilted my head. "What do you mean?" His phone buzzed again and again, messages flooding in. I knew what they were. From his bank, "Your account has been frozen due to an official investigation." From his employer, "You are required to report to HR immediately." From Rebecca, "Jacob, what the hell is going on? The condo lease isn't getting paid. Call me now." He ran a hand through his hair, his breathing ragged. "Lori, I can explain." I smiled, standing up slowly. "Oh, I'm sure you can." He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "Before you do, let me ask you something, Jacob." He swallowed. "What?" I took a slow step forward, my voice calm, even. "Tell me, was it worth it?" His face froze. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. "The secret account? The prenup? The new apartment with Rebecca?" His breath hitched. "How did you?" "Oh, Jacob." I sighed, shaking my head. "You always thought you were the smartest person in the room, didn't you?" He took a step back. For the first time, he looked scared. I picked up my overnight bag from the chair and slung it over my shoulder. "You spent years preparing for a life without me, Jacob." I met his eyes. "Now you finally have it." Then I turned and walked out the door, leaving him behind to deal with the disaster he created. Jacob thought he was untouchable, that he could betray me and walk away with his money, his job, and his mistress. Now, his accounts were frozen, his job was in jeopardy, his new life with Rebecca was falling apart. And the best part? I wasn't even done yet. Jacob thought he had planned everything perfectly. He had a hidden bank account, a prenup to protect himself, and a new life waiting with Rebecca. But what he didn't know was that I had flipped the script. While he was busy sneaking around, thinking he was steps ahead, I had already dismantled his entire plan. And tonight? Tonight, he would finally realize it. The aftermath begins. I had barely stepped into my hotel room when my phone buzzed. "Jacob." I didn't answer. Then another text. "Lori, pick up. We need to talk." I tossed my phone onto the bed and poured myself a glass of wine. Tonight, I would let him suffer. I imagined him sitting in our apartment, staring at his frozen bank account, Rebecca's furious texts flooding his phone, and the panic creeping in as he realized his life was falling apart. The best part? This was only the beginning. Step 1. Rebecca's awakening. Jacob thought Rebecca was his backup plan, his fresh start, but what he didn't understand was that she was just as shallow as he was. She wasn't with him for love. She was with him for the money, the promises, the lifestyle. And now, he had none of it left. I imagined how it unfolded. Rebecca, standing in her luxury condo, staring at the lease payment failed notification on her phone. Her carefully curated world cracking at the edges. Then she calls Jacob. "What the hell is going on?" Jacob, sitting in our apartment, rubbing his temples, his voice strained. "There's been a mistake." "But Rebecca isn't stupid. Your account is frozen. The lease isn't getting paid. What kind of mistake is that, Jacob?" He stammers. She connects the dots. Then comes the realization. "You told me you had savings. You told me we were set. You lied to me." The panic sets in. Rebecca isn't a woman who waits around. And Jacob is no longer the man she thought he was. By the time their conversation ends, she has one foot out the door. Jacob had bet everything on Rebecca. Now, she was about to walk away from him, too. Step 2. The employer's bombshell. Jacob thought his job was secure, that his company wouldn't find out. But corporate fraud isn't something you can hide forever. By the time he showed up to work the next morning, HR was waiting for him. Jacob, can you step into my office? He knew something was wrong the moment he saw the documents on the desk. Bank statements, expense reports, fraudulent transactions. His boss was a stern man, a man who didn't tolerate disloyalty or deception. Care to explain why company funds were transferred to your personal account? Jacob stammered, trying to spin a lie. But the truth? It was already too late. You're fired, Jacob. And I suggest you get a lawyer. By the time he left the office, he was unemployed, his reputation in ruins, and one step closer to complete destruction. Step 3. The last straw. Jacob spent the day trying to fix things. He called the bank, no luck. He texted Rebecca, no response. He emailed HR, no answer. By the time he got home, he was a wreck. And that's when he found the final surprise waiting for him. A thick envelope, sitting on the kitchen table. Inside, legal documents, a lawsuit from his former employer, a demand for full restitution, all the money he had stolen. And the worst part? The amount. $150,000. The exact amount in his once-hidden savings account. Jacob had spent years preparing for a future without me. Now, that future was gone. The call I had been waiting for at 9:37 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Jacob. I sipped my wine, staring at the screen. I almost didn't pick up. But then, I did. Lori, he breathed. His voice was strained, on the edge of breaking. You did this, I smiled. Did what, Jacob? Don't play games with me, he snapped. My accounts are locked. My job is gone, Rebecca. He cut himself off. I laughed softly. Oh, Jacob, what did you expect? Silence. Then his voice dropped. I can fix this. We can fix this. I rolled my eyes. No, Jacob, you can fix this. Because I'm already gone. His breath hitched. Please, he whispered. I need you. And that was the moment I knew. I had won. Jacob, the man who had planned his escape, who had left nothing for me, who had betrayed me in the worst way. Now he was begging. I let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. Then I exhaled softly. Good luck with that. And I hung up. Jacob had spent years preparing for a life without me. Now, he was truly alone. Jacob thought he had planned everything perfectly. But he made one fatal mistake. He underestimated me. His bank accounts? Frozen. His job? Gone. Rebecca out of the picture. His money? Seized. And me? I was just getting started. Jacob had built his escape plan carefully. A secret bank account, a prenup that locked me out, and a new life waiting with Rebecca. But what he didn't count on, what he never even considered, was that I was watching. That I had been 3 steps ahead of him the whole time. And now, his perfect little plan was falling apart. The final domino falls. I thought Jacob would fight back. That he would call his lawyer. That he would try to manipulate his way out of this. But instead, he ran. The moment he realized the lawsuit was real, that his former employer was coming for him, that his bank accounts were frozen, that Rebecca had abandoned him, he packed a bag and disappeared. But he couldn't go far. Because when you have no money, no job, and no allies left, the only place you can go is backward. And that's exactly where he ended up, at his parents' house, back in his childhood bedroom with nowhere else to turn. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Meanwhile, I was thriving. For the first time in years, I woke up without a weight on my chest. No more secrets, no more lies, no more waiting for the other shoe to drop. I had moved into a new apartment, one I had chosen without Jacob. The walls were painted light blue, a color he would have hated. The couch was bold red, nothing like the beige tones he had insisted on. For the first time, the space was mine. And it felt amazing. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I booked a solo trip. A weekend getaway to the coast. Jacob had always hated traveling, always found an excuse to stay home to keep me tied to the routine he controlled. Now, I was free, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. Jacob's last attempt. I should have expected it. Men like Jacob don't just disappear quietly. A week after he ran home to Mommy and Daddy, my phone buzzed with a new message. Jacob, I know things ended badly, but can we talk? I laughed. Of course, now he wanted to talk. I ignored him. A few hours later, another message. Jacob, please, Lori, I just want to explain. Explain. What was there to explain? That he had stolen from me? That he had lied to my face? That he had planned to replace me the moment it was convenient? I turned my phone over, letting the message sit there, unread. Jacob had spent years keeping me in the dark. Now? He could sit in silence for a while. But he didn't give up that easily. 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I already knew who it was. Still, I answered, just to hear him squirm. Lori, he breathed. His voice was hollow, like he hadn't slept in days. I need to see you. I took a sip of my coffee, staring out over the city. Why? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Because, he hesitated. Because I miss you. Because I made a mistake. I let out a small laugh. Which mistake are you referring to, Jacob? Silence. I could practically hear his mind racing, searching for an answer. The money? I asked. The prenup? The secret girlfriend? I was scared, he stammered. I thought I needed to protect myself. Protect yourself from what? Another long silence. Then finally, in the smallest voice, from losing everything. I leaned back in my chair, letting those words hang in the air. Well, I said, voice light, almost amused. Looks like you failed at that too. And then, before he could beg, before he could try to crawl his way back into my life, I hung up. No closure needed. Some people think you need closure, that you need an apology, a moment of reckoning, a final conversation to wrap things up in a neat little bow. But I didn't need any of that. Jacob had already given me all the closure I needed. The frozen accounts, the failed scheme, the desperate phone calls. He had dug his own grave. And now? He was lying in it. The sweetest revenge? Moving on. Jacob had spent years planning his way out of our life together. Now, he was stuck in place. Meanwhile, I was moving forward. I had a new apartment, a new career opportunity, and for the first time in forever, I was making decisions just for me. A month later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a crumpled check. From Jacob. The amount? $500. I laughed out loud. A pathetic attempt at reconciliation. At repaying the hundreds of thousands he had tried to steal from me. I tore it up and threw it away. Jacob had always been about control, and now he had none. Final words. People like Jacob never change. They just find new victims. But this time, I wasn't one of them. I had taken back my life, and he would never get another piece of it. Because the best revenge isn't destroying someone else. It's thriving without them. And that's exactly what I plan to do. I thought that after everything, the betrayal, the lies, the secret life, Jacob would have the decency to disappear. But men like Jacob don't just fade away. They linger. They wait for a chance to crawl back in, whispering apologies they don't mean, testing the waters to see if they can still control you. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Jacob had spent years preparing for life without me. Now I was finally living my life without him. And I had never felt stronger. His last attempt at control. 3 weeks after his world collapsed, I got a message. Not from Jacob, from his mother. Mrs. Harrison. Lori, I think you should talk to Jacob. He's not doing well. I almost laughed. Of course, now that his backup plan had failed, he was running to his parents for help. It was classic Jacob. When things got tough, he didn't own up to his mistakes. He played the victim. I ignored the message. But a few days later, she sent another one. He made mistakes, yes. But you loved him once, didn't you? Doesn't that count for something? Count for something? Had it counted when he was stealing from me? When he was lying to my face? When he was preparing to leave me for another woman while I was still planning our wedding? No. Love meant nothing when it was one-sided. Jacob's pathetic apology. A week later, it happened. Jacob himself finally reached out. I was at my new apartment, curled up with a book, when my phone buzzed with a blocked number. I already knew who it was. I let it ring once, twice, then on the third ring I answered. Lori? His voice was hesitant, almost small. Good. I didn't say anything. I wanted to hear your voice. I rolled my eyes. So predictable. I messed up, he continued. I know that now, and I need to explain. I sighed. Jacob, I don't care. He went silent. But, no buts. You did what you did. You got caught. You lost everything. That's not my problem. I could hear him swallow. Lori, please. You have to understand. I was scared. Stop. He shut up. You weren't scared, Jacob. You were selfish. You were calculating. And now you're just mad that your little plan didn't work. Silence. For the first time ever, Jacob had no excuse. No lie, no manipulation. Just nothing. Finally, he let out a shaky breath. I loved you, Lori. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. No, Jacob, you loved controlling me. And with that, I hung up, blocked his number. And just like that, he was gone for good. Breaking free. After everything, I realized something. I wasn't just free from Jacob's lies. I was free from all the little ways he had made me shrink. The way I had dressed to match his preferences. The way I had avoided certain hobbies because he thought they were a waste of time. The way I had dimmed myself just to make him feel bigger. But now, I was done being small. I got a tattoo, a small, delicate one, just for me. I went out dancing with friends, something Jacob always rolled his eyes at. I bought the bright red couch he hated, and most importantly, I stopped waiting for anyone else's approval. Meanwhile, Jacob was still falling. The last thing I heard about Jacob? He lost the lawsuit. His employer took every last cent of his stolen savings. Rebecca? Gone. His family stopped bailing him out once they realized the truth. He was officially alone. And for once, I didn't feel sorry for him, because he did it to himself. The sweetest revenge? Moving on. One day, months later, I ran into an old friend. She glanced around before leaning in. You heard about Jacob, right? I shrugged. Not really. Why? She smirked. He's working at some small accounting firm, barely making ends meet. He looks miserable. I smiled. Well, sounds like everything worked out then? Because I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to see him suffer. I didn't need him to regret losing me. I just needed to know I was better off without him. And now, I did. Because while Jacob was stuck in the ruins of his own mistakes, I was out there, thriving. And that was the real victory.